It was said that Ashbourne Manor had not known laughter since the Duke returned from war. Its corridors held the hush of mourning, though no funeral had been declared. Within its high gray walls, Lady Eleanor Whitmore, now Duchess of Ashbourne, moved like a ghost draped in silk. Her footsteps, soft against marble floors, were the only sounds that dared disturb the stillness her husband had built like a fortress. Their marriage, celebrated beneath a canopy of roses and pearls, had been the talk of London for precisely 3 weeks. Society had smiled at her youth, at the perfection of her manners, at the loveliness of her dowry. But whispers bloomed quickly in the drawing rooms of Mayfair. The Duke does not look upon his wife. At every gathering, he stood apart, courteous but cold, his expression carved from restraint. When the waltz began, he did not dance. When she spoke, his gaze wandered elsewhere, as though the air between them were made of glass and duty. To the world, he was a hero. William Hawthorne, the Iron Duke of Ashbourne, had returned from Waterloo a man of unshakable composure. But beneath his medals, his chest carried the weight of those who had not returned. He had seen the color drain from too many faces, and the memory of one, his betrothed before the war, haunted him like a benediction unfulfilled. He had buried her name beneath years of silence, but silence, like soil, sometimes grows what one tries to forget. On a January evening, the Duchess sat at the long dining table alone. Candles flickered against silverware polished to perfection. Across from her, the Duke's chair remained empty, its napkin untouched. The clock ticked solemnly, each sound a small betrayal. She lifted her spoon mechanically, tasting nothing. The servants, discreet, loyal, invisible, glided through their duties, eyes lowered, pity muted behind decorum. Outside, the wind pressed against the windows, a restless thing. Inside, Eleanor's composure began to crack. She looked toward the doorway, half expecting him to appear, to speak, to offer even a word of civility. But the doorway remained a frame for absence. She straightened, smoothing the folds of her gown, and forced her voice steady as she said to the butler, "You may clear the second setting, Mr. Crane. His Grace will not be joining us." Her tone was soft, but the command struck like glass against stone. Later, in her chamber, a letter awaited her on the vanity. The familiar handwriting of her mother looped elegantly across the page. "Be patient, my dear. Men of consequence are slow to reveal affection. Endure with grace. It will not go unnoticed." Eleanor read the words twice, her reflection wavering in the mirror beside them. She wondered if grace meant silence, and if endurance meant the slow unthreading of hope. At 22, she had dreamed of love, of conversation beneath candlelight, of laughter carried down corridors. Yet she had accepted this match, as all well-bred daughters must, a bridge between families, an arrangement polished by circumstance. She had told herself that affection might grow, that gentleness could be learned. But 4 months of solitude had taught her otherwise. Her husband did not avoid her from cruelty, but from fear, of remembrance, of tenderness, of life itself. She sensed it in the way he glanced away when her hand brushed his in passing, as though her touch were the echo of something he had once lost. In the afternoons, she walked the gardens, though winter had stripped them bare. She admired the symmetry of the hedges, the precision of the Duke's world. Every path measured, every tree pruned, every emotion contained. Yet beneath the frost, she could feel the pulse of something stubborn, waiting. The narrator of her own thoughts whispered, "If beauty can survive a winter, perhaps love can survive neglect." That evening, thunder rolled far off in the hills. The Duke was in the stables, as always, tending to his horses himself, a habit unbecoming of his rank. The servants said he found peace there among creatures that demanded nothing of him. Eleanor, standing at her window, watched the stable lanterns glow against the storm-dark fields. She envied the horses their nearness to him, their place in a world where words were unnecessary. When the first drops of rain began to fall, she lit the candles in the drawing room and opened the pianoforte, though she had not played since her wedding. Her fingers hesitated above the keys, then found a melody, soft, searching, uncertain. The notes filled the air like the beginning of speech after a long silence. Each chord trembled, reaching for something unnamed. When she finished, the room seemed fuller, almost alive. A soft creak sounded in the hall. She turned, expecting to see him there, but only shadows stared back. The storm deepened. She closed the pianoforte gently and whispered into the empty air. "You may ignore me, my lord, but the silence will not always obey." Much later, as she climbed the staircase to her chamber, faint laughter drifted from below. Two footmen talking near the servants' hall. She paused, hearing her husband's name, her own. "He sleeps in the stables again," one whispered. "For months wed, and he cannot bear her company." A pause, a muffled chuckle. Poor lady, she must think herself invisible. Eleanor stood motionless, hand against the banister. Then she smiled, a fragile, dangerous smile that belonged more to defiance than despair. "Invisible," she repeated softly, as though testing the shape of the word. In the flicker of the candle, her reflection in the hallway mirror seemed to steady, the tears unshed. When she entered her room, she crossed the window and looked once more toward the stables. Lightning illuminated the fields in brief, silver light. Somewhere beneath that roof, her husband sought refuge from memories he would not name. She let the curtain fall and whispered to the storm, "Then I shall learn to love silence." Outside, thunder answered. Inside, the pianoforte keys quivered faintly, as if remembering the touch of her hands. Spring crept upon Ashbourne Manor like a secret, timid and half-believed. The frost retreated from the hedgerows, and faint buds appeared along the rose-walks, though the Duke's household still moved in winter's rhythm, quiet, measured, cautious. Lady Eleanor watched the changing season from her drawing-room window, her reflection hovering ghost-like upon the glass. Behind her, the pianoforte waited, a silent companion. She had not touched it since that storm-lit night when her husband's absence had become undeniable. Yet something within her, some tender rebellion, longed to fill the house with sound once more. London had begun to stir for the season, that glittering parade of wealth and ambition. Invitations arrived daily, each addressed to the Duchess of Ashbourne, though rarely accompanied by her husband's name. She answered few, and those she did attend alone, beneath the gaze of society's pity and curiosity. Whispers followed her through gilded ballrooms, a beauty wasted, a duchess unloved. She heard it all, smiling with the composure of marble. What they did not see was how loneliness, over time, refines dignity into an art. When she returned from one such evening, a supper at Lady Hensley's where her husband's absence had been the entertainment of the night, Eleanor lingered before the mirror in her dressing room. The candlelight wavered over the jewels at her throat, reflecting upon her face in fractured gold. For a moment, she studied herself not as a woman, but as society did, graceful posture, immaculate poise, eyes too solemn for 22. "Lovely," she murmured without warmth. Then, lowering her gaze, she whispered, but never seen. The words felt treacherous, yet true. Downstairs, the Duke of Ashbourne returned late from London. His carriage wheels splashed through rain-soaked roads, the lamps of the manor glowing faintly ahead. Within him stirred that familiar ache, a longing he refused to name. His wife's gentleness unsettled him more than any battle ever had. She was the kind of woman who asked nothing, and that, to a man burdened by ghosts, was unbearable. He entered his study and poured himself brandy, staring into the fire as thunder murmured far away. Above him, faint and delicate, a sound drifted through the ceiling. Music. He froze. It was the pianoforte, the notes soft as breath, hesitant as confession. He set down the glass without drinking. Each chord rose and fell like a heartbeat, rediscovering its rhythm. Slowly, he climbed the stairs and paused outside the half-open door of the drawing room. Inside, Eleanor sat at the instrument, hair unbound, candlelight touching her cheek like reverence. Her fingers trembled at first, then steadied. The melody was one of aching restraint, a waltz she had once played at their wedding dinner, now transformed by sorrow into something haunting and new. He stood motionless, his shadow stretching across the floor. Something in him cracked, a realization, fragile but sharp. He had imagined her a creature of grace and silence, untouched by longing. But this music revealed what words never could: her courage, her loneliness, her defiance dressed in melody. He watched until the final note trembled in his silence. She turned her head slightly, sensing presence, but when she looked back, the doorway was empty. The Duke was gone. The next morning, a small package arrived in her chamber, left upon the table by a footman. Inside lay a single white rose, pressed flat between vellum, and a card bearing no words. She stared at it for a long time. Was it apology, pity, or the faintest flicker of feeling? Whatever it was, she placed it in her journal, between pages yet unwritten. That night, when she glanced in her mirror, she almost thought she saw warmth return to her reflection. Yet society, ever hungry for scandal, was not satisfied with subtle gestures. At the first garden fete of the season, she found herself cornered by Lord Redford, a man of charm too rehearsed and eyes too bold. He bowed low, murmuring compliments meant to sound harmless, but edged with mischief. "Your husband is a fortunate man, Duchess," he said, voice carrying just enough to be overheard. Though some would say he is unaware of it. Murmurs rippled around them like the flutter of fans. Eleanor's smile did not falter. "Fortune," she replied calmly, "is seldom aware of its own worth." The moment hung, brittle and perfect. Then the Duke appeared across the lawn. He had arrived unannounced, his uniform traded for a dark coat, his expression unreadable. Their eyes met, hers steady, his shadowed. He did not approach, only inclined his head in distant acknowledgment. Lord Redford stepped aside, embarrassed by the sudden gravity that seemed to settle over them. The Duke's gaze lingered for a heartbeat longer, then moved away. By evening, the city hummed with new gossip. The Iron Duke is jealous at last. Eleanor heard it from her maid with a half-smile that revealed nothing. Back at the manor, the air between husband and wife shifted, though neither could name how. The Duke spoke little, but he no longer looked through her. He lingered at the threshold when she played, and once, when passing her in the corridor, he paused as if to speak, but silence reclaimed him. In that quiet, something unnamed began to grow. She found herself playing more often, not for him, but because she could sense him listening. As April waned, she returned again to her mirror. This time, the reflection seemed changed, not softer, but alive. Her loneliness had become light rather than shadow. She touched the glass, tracing her outline as if greeting a friend newly found. Behind her, the pianoforte gleamed beneath the morning sun. She did not know that downstairs, the Duke stood listening at the base of the staircase, the ghost of a smile hidden beneath weariness. That night, unable to sleep, he drifted through the halls. The melody returned, faint, uncertain, and irresistibly human. He reached the drawing-room door and stopped. Eleanor's candle burned low, her head bowed over the keys, lashes glistening. For one suspended breath, he almost stepped forward. His hand found the doorknob, cold metal beneath trembling fingers. Then, as if struck by his own cowardice, he let go. She looked up sharply, sensing him near, but saw only the darkened corridor. The candle wavered, the music faltered. She whispered to the emptiness, "How can silence be so near and still so far?" Down the hall, unseen, the Duke pressed his palm against the wall, as though steadying himself against a force stronger than grief. The echo of her final note lingered in the air, delicate as forgiveness, fragile as hope. The storm began just after dusk, sweeping in from the moors like a memory too long suppressed. Thunder rolled over Ashbourne Manor, its deep growl threading through every corridor, rattling window panes and quivering candle flames. The servants hurried to secure shutters, but within the grand house, only two souls remained wakeful, one haunted by dreams, the other by absence. The Duke lay in his study, sleepless once more. Rain beat against the tall windows, each drop a whisper of the battlefield, the endless percussion of loss. He had tried brandy, letters, ledgers, even prayer, but nothing softened the image of the dying. Faces half buried in mud. A woman's name, Catherine, like a wound that never scarred. He had believed he could build walls of duty around his grief. But the walls were thin, and tonight the storm broke through. From somewhere above came a faint sound, the pianoforte again. That same melody, tentative and searching. His breath caught, unsteady. For months he had heard her play in stolen fragments, yet he had never entered the room. Tonight, something compelled him. He rose, his steps soundless on the carpet, and followed the thread of music through the dim halls. The closer he drew, the warmer the air seemed, as though light itself clung to her presence. Eleanor sat before the instrument, candlelight haloing her in gold. Her white gown shimmered faintly, the fabric whispering as she played. The storm's rhythm merged with her own, thunder beneath, melody above, until it was impossible to tell whether the house trembled from weather or emotion. Her expression was unguarded. The poise of a duchess dissolved into something achingly human. She did not see him at first. Her eyes were closed, lashes wet with the effort not to cry. He stepped inside. "You play as if the world might end if you stopped," he said softly. Her fingers stilled. The silence that followed felt alive. Slowly, she turned toward him. "Forgive me, my lord. I did not think you would be awake." "I am always awake," he replied, though the words sounded like confession. She rose, smoothing her gown, uncertain whether to curtsy or flee. "I disturb you, then. I will stop." "No." He moved closer, rain dripping faintly from his hair where he'd stepped beneath a leaking eave. "Do not stop on my account." "The music," his voice faltered. "It keeps the ghosts at bay." She regarded him with quiet wonder. In 4 months of marriage, he had never spoken so plainly. "Then we are both haunted," she said. Lightning flared, revealing their faces in sharp relief. Hers pale but resolute, his drawn and weary. He crossed to the window, hands clasped behind his back. "You do not know what it is to wake each night with blood still on your hands." Her voice, when it came, was steady. "No, but I know what it is to wake each morning beside an empty chair." The remark, gentle as it was, struck him harder than reproach. He turned, eyes shadowed. "I thought you would prefer silence to the company of a broken man." "I would prefer truth," she answered. "Silence is merely another kind of cruelty." A gust of wind burst the window open. Rain swept in, extinguishing one of the candles. In the sudden darkness, they stood only a few feet apart, breath mingling in the cold air. She reached to close the window, but he caught it first, his hand brushing hers. The contact froze them both. His skin was warm despite the chill, and the touch, so simple, so forbidden by their mutual restraint, felt like the first honest word they had ever spoken. "Why did you marry me?" she asked quietly. "Because I could not love again," he said, the truth tumbling out before he could stop it. "Because duty is easier than desire. Because I mistook silence for peace." Her eyes glistened, but no tears fell. And now, he hesitated, the weight of years pressing against his chest. "Now I find myself envying my own servants for hearing your music when I cannot bear to." She gave a small, incredulous laugh, half joy, half disbelief. "You listen?" "Always." The word was almost a plea. "Every note reminds me what I've lost, and what I might still find if I dared." For a moment neither moved. The storm softened, as though pausing to listen. He stepped closer, only an arm's length away now, his voice low. "You deserve a man untouched by ghosts." "Then teach your ghosts to listen," she whispered. He looked at her then, truly looked, not as an obligation, nor as a fragile thing to be pitied, but as the woman before him, steadfast amid all that was ruined within him. The world outside could have vanished, and neither would have noticed. The candlelight trembled. His hand rose, almost of its own accord, to touch her cheek. Her breath caught. For the briefest heartbeat, he leaned nearer, then stopped. "I cannot," he murmured, his forehead falling against hers. "If I touch you, I will not let go. And I am not yet fit to hold anything so kind. She closed her eyes, whispering, then do not let go. But his hand fell away. He stepped back, eyes burning. Forgive me, he said, voice breaking. You make me wish I were whole. And with that, he turned and left her standing amidst the candle smoke and rain. The door closed softly, almost tenderly behind him. Eleanor stood motionless, the echo of his presence thrumming through her pulse. The storm, having spent its fury, faded into a gentle rain. She moved to the pianoforte once more, her hands trembling as she struck a single key. The sound rang clear, solitary, like a vow formed in secret. In the quiet that followed, she whispered to the empty room, "Then I shall learn to wait." Outside, the rain fell steadily, as though heaven itself were listening. The rain had ceased some time before dawn, leaving the world washed pale and trembling. The great oaks outside Ashbourne Manor dripped quietly, each drop a soft punctuation against the hush that followed the storm. Inside, the air still carried the faint scent of rain and candle smoke, mingling with the fragrance of roses crushed under the previous night's wind. The house was slow to wake. Servants moved in whispers, as if the walls themselves still remembered the voices that had broken the silence hours ago. Eleanor stood before the mirror in her bedchamber, her reflection pale and unsettled. She had not slept. The night had been a confession, a breaking open of two hearts that had lived behind glass. His words still lingered in the hollow of her chest. I was a coward, Nell. I feared what I needed most. Now, in the thin light of morning, they felt both salvation and sentence. Her hands trembled slightly as she fastened the lace at her throat, as though by neatness she might restore the order that had vanished with the storm. Downstairs, the Duke of Ashbourne sat at the long table, untouched breakfast cooling before him. He had changed out of last night's rain-soaked attire, but fatigue and unease clung to him more stubbornly than damp wool ever could. The fire before him had burned low. He stared into it, hearing again the sound of her voice, soft, steady, breaking just once when she had asked if he had ever truly loved her. He had not lied when he said yes. Yet the truth, when spoken aloud, felt fragile, like sunlight too easily swallowed by clouds. When Eleanor entered, the rustle of her skirts was the only sound. Their eyes met, and for a moment neither spoke. Something unspoken hung between them. Not tension, not comfort, but a raw, new awareness of the other. She moved to pour tea with hands too calm, too deliberate. He rose automatically, an old instinct, but she gestured for him to sit. That simple motion, a wife's quiet command, seemed to rearrange the air. I thought perhaps you had gone riding, she said, her tone polite, careful. You used to, after a storm. He looked at her then, really looked. How pale she was in the morning light, the faint shadow beneath her eyes, the damp curl at her temple. I thought of it, he replied, but I found myself unwilling to leave the house. Her hand stilled on the teapot. Because of me? He hesitated. Because of what was said. The silence that followed was not empty. It brimmed with everything they had once feared to feel. Eleanor set down the silver pot with care. Words are fragile, Edward. They sound different when the sun is up. I know, he said quietly, and yet, they're all I have to offer. Her breath faltered. She looked at him, unsure whether to believe or to protect herself. For 4 months, she had trained her heart into stillness, and last night had undone every inch of that discipline. I don't want words, she whispered. Not unless they mean something in daylight. He rose then, slowly, as if afraid to startle her. Then let me show you, he said, voice rough. But when he took a step forward, she retreated, not in fear, but in fragile defiance. Don't, she said softly. Not yet. If you mean to love me, I must see it when no storm is forcing the truth out of you. He froze, her words cutting not in cruelty, but in clarity. He understood her perfectly. For the first time, she was not asking for apology, she was demanding proof. And proof, he knew, could not be spoken. It must be lived. The rest of the morning passed with quiet grace. Eleanor walked the rose gardens, where petals bruised by the storm still clung to their stems, stubbornly beautiful. The sun emerged, gold and reluctant. From the library window, Edward watched her, his fingers resting against the glass. The sight of her, self-contained, solitary, yet still luminous, unraveled him. She was not his possession, nor his penance. She was the pulse of the life he had nearly ruined by silence. At luncheon, he joined her unexpectedly. He spoke of small things, the tenants' cottages, the upcoming ball at court, her new pianoforte. She listened, surprised by the gentleness in his tone, the quiet attention he gave her answers. It was not passion, not yet, but something steadier, more deliberate. It was the beginning of courtship, renewed from the wreckage of marriage. When the clock struck 3, a letter arrived from London. The seal bore the crest of the crown. Eleanor saw the change in his face as he broke it open, color draining, jaw tightening. "From the prince?" she asked. He nodded once. "I'm summoned to Windsor. Matters of state." His voice was distant, formal again, as though retreating into the armor she had so briefly pierced. "I leave at dawn." Eleanor rose from her seat. "Of course," she said, though the word came hollow. "Duty comes first." He looked at her, regret shadowing his features. It needn't always. But she turned away, unwilling to let hope betray her again. That night, he stood by her door before retiring, hand poised to knock. Through the wood, he could hear her moving softly, perhaps brushing her hair, perhaps crying. He could not tell. In the end, he did nothing. He returned to his own chamber, sat upon the bed, and whispered into the empty room, "When I return, I'll make her believe me." Outside, the rain began again, soft, persistent, as though the heavens themselves refused to let the storm be over.